Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dateable AF podcast. This week, we are on episode 13, and our topic for the week is All She Said Was Hey, and Now You're Planning the Wedding. We're going to be having a conversation today about emotional intensity, premature fantasizing, and how to keep your feet on the ground when you are in early dating.
So, why does this happen?
Let's just jump in with the big question, Rachel.
I am, though. It is an honest question on my part because it isn't something that I fully relate to, uh, but it's common. So,
It
why
is
does it
really
happen,
common.
Dr. Kyle?
Well, we are going to dive into that later for sure about some of the reasons why this happens, particularly in relationships where women are dating women. But I do think I've seen a lot of people who have been there where someone just said, hey, and then suddenly, you're practicing their last name or fantasizing about how you're going to decorate your house when you get together. And I can think of a few people in my life. I've seen this with clients, I've seen this with friends and family members who every single first date feels like the one. And I could just remember some phrases people have said, like, no, this one is really different. I've never felt like this about anyone before. You've seen it too, I know.
Yes, I have. That fantasy versus reality. Um,
Yes,
and then that
100%.
whole feeling that makes people start fantasizing about stuff when they don't even know the person's birth date.
Yes, for sure. Like you don't know anything about this person and you've created a whole fantasy around their online profile or what you're reading into text conversations. So it's a really interesting topic for me just because I think it is super common. And I think we can help our listeners figure out how to avoid that or how to at least catch themselves if they start to do it.
I want to preface this conversation with a little bit of some research that I read that I thought was interesting. It was a Stanford research project, and the project was actually about commitment timing in same sex couples versus different sex couples.
Hmm.
And you know how we've always talked about the U-Haul theory for women dating women and that whole piece.
Yes,
Um,
please refer to our first full episode. I think it's actually episode 2, and we will fill you in all about the U-Haul conversation.
yes. It was very interesting though, because the overall study actually didn't show what we would call a statistically significant difference between the the rate in which same-sex couples get into relationship versus heterosexual couples.
Interesting.
But there were some interesting differences that did come out. Now
What'd you
that
find out?
doesn't they can be interesting, and that doesn't mean they're statistically different. And I'm not going to explain that to the audience, but the interesting difference. And so as we talk about this topic, I want to put these two things in our listeners' minds because I thought this was a very interesting way to think about this. Is the study was done sort of around the timing between meeting someone to relationship formation, which is really what we're kind of talking about here, that sweet spot, right? Um, versus the difference between romantic relationship to actual cohabitation.
Okay, let's hear more
So,
about that.
so I think that those are pretty interesting buckets, and I think that what we're talking about is dating, and so the time frame for dating is where you're meeting somebody to where you actually decide that you think that you have a realistic vision of a relationship, not this fantasy thing, right?
Mhm.
And I think what we're talking about is, are you one fantasizing and are you rushing through this phase of dating to getting to what you might determine as a relationship? And then there's this other tier that we don't talk about as much, which is you both agree you're in a relationship, and then you're actually moving towards some type of cohabitation, marriage, or whatever. Um, so anyway, I think that for our listeners, keep in mind that we are talking about that timing. And what was different for women in the meeting to relationship formation is that we tend to move through that a little quicker than the heterosexual couples do. Not a huge amount, not as much as we might have thought, at least based on this study. But we move faster between the relationship formation and the relationship cohabitation.
Hence the U-Haul stereotype.
Yes. And so the reason I really like this was because I'm saying to our listeners, guys, listen to this.
Yeah.
If you're not getting this meeting to relationship formation, like just meeting somebody, dating them wisely, slow your roll, that sort of thing. And then by the data that you're probably going to rush to cohabitation. So if you got to get this first part right. Is
Yes.
kind of what I'm saying to you, is that when you mess this part up, you rush it, you don't take the steps. So anyway, I think it's relevant to what we're talking about today with our listeners.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster if you're rushing both parts of that. As a therapist, I will say that what I've seen in practice anecdotally matches up with what you're saying about the research. And I think that what happens is that for women who date women, we've talked about this before too, that the dating pool is actually smaller because there are fewer lesbians in the world than there are heterosexual people in the world. And I think women in general tend to be emotionally attuned more quickly. And so when there are two women in a relationship, both of those people get emotionally attuned really quickly. And I think those things can accelerate that connection time. I think regardless of sexual orientation, I think what happens is people have this fantasy that tends to fill in all the blanks. So you read something about someone on paper and then you start to build a whole fantasy around it, or you see someone's photo and you start to imagine how they probably are in real life. And so you meet them and you're forming a relationship in your head that fills in the blanks, but they're not based on reality.
No. And you're also looking at what I would consider sort of the bigger foundational pieces that you look for later. I mean, you certainly want to look for the red flags we've talked about along the way of, do they drink too much? Do they have some issues they haven't dealt with that are really significant? But beyond that, fantasizing about taking a trip with them, and you can see yourselves decorating a house together and, doing all of those things that, instead of really paying attention to, do you like their sense of humor? What's their birthday? Just do you laugh when you're out together? Is conversation shared? Those types of things. And there are two other things that pop up for me. Is one is the kind of fantasizing about things. Also understanding if you're in a lonely place, if you're vulnerable to it because you feel lonely and you're trying to fill the void. And I think that can also create a problem for you accelerating something you really you're desperately wanting to partner. So you're just trying to move through it so quickly. I think just knowing where you sit with those things.
I think that's really true. And I find it interesting. I'm just now thinking about this, that topics that come up on the podcast tend to keep resurfacing because they're pervasive. They have to do with lots of other things. So the things we talked about on last week's podcast brought up the loneliness idea as well. So just reminding yourself that getting into a relationship should not be your cure for loneliness. You should try to fill that void within yourself before you start dating someone, so that you're not entering a relationship as a lonely person.
Right. Also, do you think that people, I have heard this, that some women are looking at, if they're, let's say, in their early 50s, maybe even their late 40s, and they're not partnered, they begin to feel some sense of urgency that now is the time. And if I don't do it now, it may not happen.
Yep. There's actually a younger threshold for that than what you're saying, because there is also this feeling of, if you want to have kids and you're 35 and you don't have a partner, it's like, I got to find someone now, because by the time I meet them, move in with them, decide to have a kid with them, I'm already going to be 40, and that's, pressing up against the limit. So yeah, that threshold starts for people, I would say early to mid 30s. They start feeling this pressure of, I don't have anyone yet.
I was talking to someone today and they really brought up an interesting point. And I mean, I think it is a little bit hard to figure out how to balance um, trying to decide using the early dating time to really see if that person has qualities and the connection is such that you want to move forward. And are you looking are you looking too far down the line to try to discern whether or not they are just not going to be marriage material? And I think that it's a hard balancing act to go, this is my time to begin to understand, but don't skip over all the steps to get to, can we live in a house together and get married? And I
Yes,
would love to hear your insight on that.
that is so good, because that kind of brings us to these signs that you might see that you're mentally moving too fast. And one of the things that brought up for me is this idea that you're fantasizing about sharing a holiday together when you haven't even shared a meal with this person yet.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
true.
And I think before we move on to some of those other signs, I did want to talk for just a minute about attachment styles and how that can come into play here. We talked about this in a couple of episodes ago, but how I'll give just a brief overview that people who are anxiously attached are people who get scared about getting left. And people who are avoidantly attached are people who get afraid of getting engulfed by the other person. And so if you're someone who's anxiously attached, like you're afraid the person's going to leave you, that can really lead to you trying to fast track that connection. You're so afraid of losing this person that you're trying to have as many dates as you can and talk to them as much as you can and text all the time. And I think that feeling of like, I got to nail her down so she doesn't get away can really impact moving things along too fast. So if you are an anxiously attached person, just know this about yourself and try to find other ways to soothe yourself besides being overly clingy with this person.
When you said you're planning holidays, but you've not even gone to a holiday meal yet or met the family.
Shared a meal yet, yeah.
Shared a meal yet. Here's what I will say about that is also, you don't want to rush that, because once you get down that line, you're stuck with those in-laws. You're stuck with those people. You need to share some serious meals with whoever they have as a part of their extended family before you put a ring on it, because
Absolutely.
There may be some shit you hate in there. I mean, they may have some bad dressing.
That's true. That would
Thanksgiving.
be terrible. Thanksgiving.
Or they don't eat turkey. They don't have blue fritas dressing. Sarah's dad made the best dressing I've ever had in my life.
He did, for a fact. Ain't nobody makes that dressing.
Nobody. Though we may try.
That's right. We all give it our best shot. That's true. But yeah, that you have this fantasy about what holidays are going to be like with this person, and then you may get into it and you don't even like their family at all, let alone do you want to spend a holiday with them. So again, just will remind you, don't fast track things, because it's not all it's cracked up to be.
I love this, rearranging your schedule or lifestyle around someone you barely know. And I mean, to me, that happens all the time. Either you don't go anywhere because you're waiting on their text, or you're waiting on the possibility. I mean, you've seen them, maybe twice, and now you're not going somewhere or doing something because you're hoping they're going to ask you to go do something.
I see this happen all the time. I really do. And you know how, well, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's this list. Well, I have these lists. I'm going to write a book about this someday, that there are these things that all parents say. And when you become a parent, you just find these things flying out of your mouth and you thought you would never say it. Like, shut the door. You trying to air condition the whole neighborhood?
Yeah.
Things like that. And then there's also, I have a list of things that all people who are having an affair say. They come in and they'll say, but I haven't had sex with my partner for 2 years, or we've been sleeping in separate beds, or things have been going downhill for a long time. It's like, but they went downhill real fast as soon as you met this affair person, right? So it's like the lexicon of all people in this category.
Yeah.
Well, there's a list of things people say who move too fast in a relationship. And I alluded to this a little earlier, but one of those things is, I've never felt like this about anyone. That, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say it, that's a red flag. As a therapist, when someone tells me I'm the only person that can help them, I know to run the other direction, because I am not the only person that can help them. There are lots and lots of good therapists out there. And so I used to think that was flattering. Same thing in a relationship. If it's like, this is the only person for me. No, this is not the only person for you. So don't get caught up in that. The other thing is, I encourage people to make a list of the qualities they want to have in a partner. I think that's a good thing to kind of know what's most important to you. And you talked about this a couple of episodes ago too, about the 3 qualities that you want your person to have. So have the list. But people say, I made this list 3 years ago and this person has all those qualities. They're an exact match. Or, I know you're probably going to laugh at this, but literally people will say, I went to a psychic and she told me that I was going to meet someone with blue eyes, and his name was, her name was going to be Joanna. Well, I mean, she has brown eyes, but her dog has blue eyes, and her sister's name is Joanna. And you're like, oh my God. Like,
oh my God.
So if you find yourself saying any of those things, that is your little tap on the shoulder to slow your roll.
Well, I'm just going to say that my last tarot card that I drew while we were on vacation says that I'm an empress. If anybody's looking for an empress,
I got one for you right here.
It's my strong feminine energy right here.
But before I can endorse Rachel as a potential date, I must tell you a little story that happened. We were going on a little friend hike while we were on vacation in Colorado. We were going to just take a casual 3-mile hike. We had one little bottle of water. And when we were about 4 miles into this hike, we ran across someone on the trail who told us we had gone the wrong way at Rachel's insistence, and it turned into an 8-mile hike. So I'm still kind of mad at her for that, but I went ahead and decided to record the podcast anyway before I fully got over my anger about it.
And I actually almost sent her wife, Jo, to the bed for the rest of the vacation because of her back. I have no idea how I'm ever going to climb out of that hole.
It is a deep hole you've gotten yourself in now, my friend. But Rachel is very certain of herself. That is one quality that I love about her. But in this moment, I was like, hey, are you sure we're going the right way? She was like, oh, for sure. I've done this like lots of times.
Oh, my God. I knew that was going to come out in this podcast.
Yep. So I don't know if I can fully endorse you as a date yet. The cards are still out. But if somebody's willing to take that risk, she is an empress for sure.
Well, so what about this idea of making excuses up for bad behavior or lack of communication? I'm a hard no on all this. So
Yep. We all know that you're not an anxiously attached person who's going to be clingy to anyone. But I do think that,
as a matter of fact, I'm probably the other one. I'm going, whoa.
I wasn't going to say that, but
go ahead. That's great. Today is my day, obviously, on the podcast.
But I think that that's really important, that if you start finding yourself saying, well, she said she was going to text me, but she's been really busy, so that's probably why I haven't heard from her. If you're making excuses for that, or she did get really drunk on our first date, but it's only because she's been super stressed out at work. It's like, no, if you're making excuses early on, that is a red flag for sure. And you are moving too fast.
Yeah. that I 100% agree. And in my research, I also found another. It's actually some research that I saw repeated over and over again in a couple of studies, and I thought I don't think it's, again, it's not concrete, but as people are thinking about this, if you are the kind of person where it helps you sort of bucket things as you begin to figure out where you are in dating and forming relationships, I thought this was really helpful. They bucket this dating thing into three phases. So there's the early dates, which are anywhere from 1 date to 4 dates. And they say that during that time, you should be looking at initial impressions and gauging attraction and seeing if you have a spark. And that happens from dates like 1 to 4. And then there's the mid range, which is the 5 to 8 dates, where you'd be more comfortable or relaxed, more serious in conversation, um, and talking about exclusivity. So whether or not you're just going to date that person. And then there's the beyond 8, which is really after, 8 dates and on, that you might have decent conversation, healthy conversation around whether or not you say you're in a relationship.
I like that. And I really like this idea of just giving yourself permission on those first 4 dates to just have fun. Just enjoy the person's company and don't try to fast track it. Don't try to fantasize about marriage or home decor or any of that stuff. I think that lets the pressure off of you and off of the other person. Like, we're just enjoying ourselves for the first 4 dates. I like that idea.
Also, I do believe that you have to accept the fact that if you're dating, there is an aspect of that is work. There is an aspect of it. I mean, I'm not saying that you should feel like you're grinding every single time you go out with somebody.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not. But that there is an aspect of dating, and especially if you're app dating at that, whatever, that is work. So meaning that I don't think you get to say, I don't want to spend a lot of time doing the 1, 2, 3, 4. I just want to get to the 8.
Yeah.
You don't get to. I mean, you can, but I don't think you're going to like what you get on the other end of that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I'm gonna see if there's another word that might be a better fit. Rather than saying it's work, you have to put energy into it.
Yeah,
You can't
that's
just
good.
lay back and see what happens. You're planning dates. You are being mindful about your communication and how often you're communicating, and you are putting effort into what you do with this person. If you're just sitting back and being passive and there's no energy or effort involved, then I think you're not going to get something positive out of that.
And it makes me think about, if you're seeing, if you're really wanting to skip the beginning part of it, which should be, at first it can be sort of nerve wracking, but after that, sort of frolicky and fun, exciting.
Yeah.
If you see that as sort of a waste of time, or you're overly anxious about it, you're trying to move along that too quickly, again, I do think that's about you. You need to pay attention to the fact that you're trying to get to the end point, and you haven't had a lot of the fun along the way.
Yeah. And I don't understand that, because those, like, that very beginning of dating someone is so much fun. There's no pressure. I mean, unless you put it on yourself, you're, you have that super fun, like, spark and chemistry. And I don't really understand why someone would want to skip that part. That seems like the fun part to me. But I hear a lot from clients. They'll say, man, I wish I could just skip to watching Netflix on a couch in my sweats with someone rather than going through all these dates. But you give yourself permission to have fun and let that be a positive thing, not a negative.
Yeah, it takes us back to that question about the spark too, because as we said, I believe it was on the last podcast episode, we talked about that. It is Some people get the initial spark. They know right up front that there is this energy to go in. You get a big spark. Some people get just sort of a friendly spark, and then maybe they work their way to that other part. But I mean, these things are difficult in that you just have to know what type of person you are. And if you're relaxing and not trying to over analyze where things are, especially in those first 8 dates, probably, but at least the first 4, just getting in there and thinking, wow, I'm just getting to know somebody.
Yes. And I think that part of that is don't skip that getting to know you part of someone, like of dating someone, because I think what happens is we so quickly decide, like I decided this was my person, and so I'm going to just skip ahead. And that's going to lead you down a path that you don't really want to go down.
Yeah. It's an interesting topic because I started out thinking this would be apparent in many instances, but it really isn't. I think people, and again, app dating, I think has made this even more difficult for folks because a lot of it is about pacing, and also they're tired from the journey
Yep.
that they've been on. And I think a lot that comes into play too, is people are feeling dating fatigue.
Yep.
And so they are putting a lot of pressure to get into a position where they don't have to do it anymore.
Yep. And I definitely get that because it is effort, it is energy that you have to put in. And it's worth it in the long run because you want to end up with the right partner. You don't want to just end up with a partner.
Yeah.
Yep. I think there were actually a couple of other things that I wanted to address about this, that if you find yourself scouring someone's text messages to see what the meaning is behind it, and you think that they're writing you secret love letters in between the lines of these texts, check yourself because they probably aren't. That's probably your fantasy taking over. The other thing is that if you find yourself getting really anxious between their replies or devastated if they don't text you back right away, that is another sign that you need to slow your roll. They might be busy. They might have other things. Hopefully they do have other things going on. And so try not to interpret that as something negative, or try not to read too much into their behavior for those at least first 4 to 8 dates. Try to take things at face value.
And we touched a little bit on this about how long you should wait. I mean, there is a balancing act of somebody reciprocating text and showing an interest, and you getting where it becomes something that's more like being ghosted, and you continuing to try to poke at that, and versus just don't stare at your phone every 2 seconds. And if they don't hit you in 10 minutes.
Yes, that's more the thing I'm talking about, is getting overly anxious. And the amount of time isn't really what I'm speaking to here, because maybe it's 10 minutes or maybe it's 2 hours or maybe it's 24 hours. What I'm speaking to is your own anxiety around that. That if you find yourself getting too caught up and too anxious about when they texted you back and what they said, and that's your sign to yourself, regardless of the amount of time it is. Try not to get so invested in what that amount of time is. Just notice it rather than making an investment in it or attaching meaning to it. Yep. So let's talk about the risks of this premature planning, like planning the wedding when you haven't even had a date yet.
Do people really do that?
Oh my God, they do. I swear, I've seen it. That they get all, down the road, and how does my last name sound with his last name or her last name? Sorry. That sort of thing. But I think what happens is that no human being is going to be as good as your fantasy. And so you create this fantasy in your head that's so amazing. And then you ignore all those red flags that might demonstrate to you that your fantasy isn't exactly accurate.
There's no doubt that in the beginning, it is typical for you to blur. You see those red flags as pink Is if you're into them, you definitely want to see all the good things. And most of the time, everybody's on their best behavior.
Yeah.
It takes a while for you to show some of those other things that eventually you will see if you stay in it long enough. Um, Hopefully, those are not deal breakers, but it is to our point that you need to begin to see what things you can live with versus what things are deal breakers for you. And those should slowly unfold as you go along. You're not going to get that from somebody in one time if all you're seeing are stars. I mean, it's not realistic.
Yes, for sure. And I think what happens is that people start to get emotionally invested before there's any kind of earned trust or before there's even mutual interest necessarily. So just pay attention to that and don't make an emotional investment until you've actually had some experience with this person.
Yeah, that also it just creates pressure. Again, which causes problems in you having fun.
Yes.
So that pressure, the more you are fantasizing about the big stuff down the road, uh, the less, the more pressure you're putting. And I don't, even if you're not talking about it and it's just in your head, I mean, you can probably attest to this, Sarah, is that for sure it's coming across, whether it's uh, passive aggressively coming across or subtly
Mhm.
coming across, but you're pressing for things that you don't need to press for.
Yeah, people read your energy. And if your energy is rushing the relationship ahead, no matter what your words say, the other person's feeling that energy from you about rushing.
Yeah, I've been using this analogy, or I've been using this lately with uh, someone that I've been conversing with, is like you're like peeling an onion. Um, that you just sort of start with that top layer and find out something fun about them, and that surprises you maybe, and then maybe find out what is in the next layer of that onion that's right under that, um, and then hopefully hopefully when you get a little deeper into it, they won't make you cry.
I was just going to say, if you cut right into that onion, it's going to make you cry. I like this analogy.
Got a lot of candle. So you don't
Exactly.
cry.
Yep. So just take it one layer at a time and it won't make you cry. I like that. I like it. Yeah. Because what happens is when you put all this pressure, if you try to dive right into the center of the onion, what happens is if it doesn't work out, then you are devastated. It hurts way more than it should because you didn't just lose a crush on someone, you lost a whole future that you had imagined with this person. And that, like, you're grieving the idea that you had about the relationship, not just the relationship itself. So I don't know if you've seen that, but I've seen with friends and clients people getting heartbroken after a few dates with someone. And you're like, I don't understand that. You only went on a few dates. And it's like, but they weren't grieving that actual person. They were grieving the loss of their fantasy.
I have seen it, and it is it's hard to witness because it's not congruent with time spent.
No. And I think what happens is that you end up sabotaging the connection with someone, like we were saying about they feel your energy, and that really intense energy that wants to rush things along scares people away. Like it's too intense and it's too overly attached too quickly, and it ends up wrecking things.
And I think it's good to not make the assumption because I think this assumption has been made about me that just because you don't want to rush things or you don't want to move into that intensity right in the beginning, that it means that you're not available. And I don't think that's true. I mean, sometimes it might be true, but I don't think that's necessarily, I don't think that those things they don't go hand in hand all the time. It just means that somebody wants to have some fun, try it on, just chill a little bit and see what happens.
Yeah. So, and I could see that just thinking about people that you've had some dates with, that you don't want to rush things. You're not someone who's going to see someone every night of the week for 2 weeks straight. And I know that some of those women have been people you were genuinely interested in. And so I think maybe they got the wrong idea because you weren't diving in head first and, you know, renting the U-Haul, that they thought you weren't interested when you actually were.
So I'm just going to say this. You could be living with me and you are not going to see me every night of the week. I mean, you'll see me, but
But you're
it'll
going to
be
have
in the
some other
morning when I
plans.
say good morning and in the bed at night when I say good night.
Yeah, and that's healthy because you have your own life. You have a full, rich life, and you're not looking for someone else to complete you. And so to me, that's actually a real strength that you bring to the table.
Yeah. I saw something that said, and I don't know if you agree with this or you discuss it with clients, but there's this 70-30 equation when you're in relationship with somebody, that 70% of your time should be spent together, 30% of your time spent doing other things and apart. I mean, that seemed a little chinchy on the apart part of it for me.
Might need to be more like 60-40 for you.
I was thinking 60-40.
60-40 sounds good.
Maybe. I'm just saying it might.
So all you clingy single women out there,
I am not your girl.
Don't be hitting up Rachel.
I am definitely.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And we've talked about this before, but it gives you that balance gives you good food for conversation when you come back together. If you're spending every moment together, what are you going to talk about? So go have your separate experiences and then come back and you'll have great conversations.
What about staying grounded without killing the fun?
Yeah, because you don't want to deprive yourself of that spark, that giddiness, that excitement. Give yourself permission to have that fully, but don't build a whole life off of that one vibe.
And I think this, try not, check in with your friends or your co-host.
You know, I'm going to have an opinion about it.
So I will say that I am privileged to have people that are willing to tell me whether or not I'm in the right vibe space with someone.
I'm like, girl, she is not for you.
I don't want to mention who it is, but no, I love that I do have close friends who are willing to ask me good questions. But that, I will say this in all honesty, my closest friends that I check myself with, I don't check myself with everybody, but I have a few people that I do that know me really well. They don't say, no, that girl is not for you. They ask me questions. And I love that because they will ask me questions that they know I need to be considering. And then they mostly allow me to come to my own conclusions. And if I'm really lucky, they don't say, I told you so.
Well, I mean, that would be a terrible thing to say, wouldn't it? I personally would never say that.
A professional therapist would never say that.
Hey, I'm off the clock. I'm off the clock. I could say it to you. I don't think I've said exactly that. I might have given you a knowing look, but I don't think I've actually said I told you so specifically.
Oh.
But you knew I was right all along.
God, help me. What about dating other people while you're in this process?
Well, I think that staying in the dating bee, especially in those early days, is a really helpful thing. I think you don't want to mentally close the door too soon. And I think with women, it's harder. It's harder to allow ourselves to date multiple people at the same time, but that keeps you from jumping in too quickly with one person. And so, yeah, I'd say stay in the dating bee in those early days and be honest. That's also a key, is don't let any of those women think that you're exclusively dating them, because that's not fun.
Couple of things I'll say about that is, yes, we talked about this. We'll bring it up again, is be honest and be mindful of being careful with
Mhm.
that. The other thing is that when you're in that early phase, you don't talk to anybody else about your dates. You don't need to do that. You don't
You
need
mean
to
talk to other people you're dating or talk to your
the
friends?
other people you're dating. You
Oh,
don't
no.
need to talk to
Mm-mm.
them about your date. I mean, the conversation is not the details of how many people you're going out with,
Yeah.
who you're going out with, and what you like about them versus what you don't like about the other person. That's not
No.
necessary.
Red
And
flag.
so, yeah, but the openness is that you're not in a committed relationship and that you may be dating other people if the
Yeah.
opportunity arises. That's all that you need to know. And then the flip side, the other side of that, those of you that maybe aren't doing that, or you're trying to rush this process and you're trying to rein that person in, if you start asking them a lot of questions about who they're dating and the details, then that's on you. Don't
Yeah,
do that.
no, don't do that.
You
No,
don't need to
not
know.
this is not the phase of the relationship where you need to get into details about any of that stuff. Just the overarching idea that we're allowed to see other people. We probably both are seeing other people. That's enough, but don't get in the weeds about that. And I think just really reminding yourself to stay curious about this person, like who is she really? You're not making a commitment to her, you're just investigating and finding out more details about who this person is and slowing yourself down, just taking it one step at a time.
Yep. Good suggestions. We have
Yep.
excellent suggestions on this one.
And mentally asking yourself, like, what do I really know versus what's the fantasy I'm making up in my head about this person?
Yeah. And I love the idea of knowing if you are missing something, if you're feeling lonely, you have a void to fill, find some other ways to do that. Go out, play some pickleball, journal, do something else to ground you around those things.
Yes, absolutely. And just something that gets you out of the house and stops you from staying home and just spiraling and obsessing about this person, because that's a huge red flag if you find yourself doing that. This is not how a healthy relationship starts.
Nope. Nope.
Okay, well, let's do a little wrap up. And what do we want folks to take away from this episode, Rachel?
Well, the one thing I think it's good is just to let people know that you're not crazy, you're just human. And we all have variations of these feelings. And so not to be critical but fantasizing is normal and that you just shouldn't, but it shouldn't be your GPS.
Right. Agreed. Like let yourself have fun with it, but if it starts consuming your life, that is that's a red flag. So basically the goal isn't to stop being excited. Let yourself be excited. Let yourself have that spark and be giddy, but your goal is to stay open and grounded while you're getting to know that person.
And relationships take time to build. So thinking about that 1 to 4, 5 to 8, 8 and above kind of numbers of dates, take your time and instead of let reality drive it, not your fantasies. And now, I mean, the sexual fantasies, that's a different conversation. We'll talk about that later, but that one may
that
be okay.
that one might come into play in our next episode. Well, that is a wrap for today's episode. So if this resonated with you, if you have a friend who's kind of mentally getting married after one coffee date, please share this episode with her, because when you share, it helps us grow. And we're really trying to grow the reach of our podcast. So we need you to share. And please keep sending us your comments and your questions and your wildest she said hey and I spiraled moments. So we'll be featuring these in our after party episode. So be sure to tune in for that.
And what's our next episode?
Ooh, y'all are going to love our next episode.
Ooh,
It
that's
is
gonna be so
called
fun.
Lesbian Bed Death, Myth, Reality, or Just Bad Scheduling.
I can't wait for that one.
It's going to be a good one. So please follow us and subscribe on Spotify podcast, Apple Podcasts. We also have a YouTube if you want to see us on the video, but follow us on Instagram at DateableAF. And thank you for listening to the Dateable AF podcast, where we help you find your happy ending.
And remember, be bold, be kind, and for the love of queer dating, don't text your ex. Stay dateable.
AF.